My wife abandoned me on a forgotten platform with no money, no identity, and no way home. Then a blind stranger turned to me and said a single sentence that would rewrite the rest of my life. The story begins on a Saturday whose sunlight felt heavy, the kind that shows every crack in a face, every flaw in a life. I was 60 years old, a warehouse worker with calloused palms and a back that had learned the language of pain one box at a time. For 35 years, I had been married to Lisa. For 35 years, I had convinced myself that duty was the highest form of love. You wake before dawn, you punch the clock. You return when the sky is bruised with evening. You hand over your strength and call it devotion. You call it enough. We had taken a bus upstate to visit her cousin. 2 hours of rolling fields and tired motels, 2 hours of me watching the window's reflection because it hurt less than watching my wife smile at messages she would not let me see. She typed with the hush of a secret and the speed of certainty. I pretended not to notice. Sometimes the cheaper mercy is silence. When we arrived at the station, a squat building with peeling paint, a vending machine that coughed instead of worked, and a clock whose hands seemed to move only when no one looked, she said she wanted to buy sweets from a shop across the square. I told her I would wait on the bench. My knees did not negotiate with long walks anymore. She laughed. A small, hard sound that did not belong to the woman I married. Sitting again, Henry, she said, each word snapping like a thin branch in dry air. You are always tired. You always have an excuse. People turned. Even pigeons paused mid-peck. Shame burns differently at 60 than it does at 20. It does not blister so much as it settles. A slow red tide under the skin. Please, not here, I whispered. Where then? Her voice rose. And with it my past choices stood up around me like witnesses. In our miserable apartment you cannot even finish paying for? Look at this place, she said, sweeping her hand at cracked tiles and sun-baked tracks. We cannot even travel like normal people. Every sentence landed like a boot on my chest. I reached for her arm. She pulled away as if I carried heat. Do not touch me, she said. There is a tone people use when they have already decided to leave. It is clean, like new glass. It cuts precisely where it intends. She took a long breath. Something in her eyes turned off, a house whose lights go dark room by room. It is over, Henry. Then came a small, cruel theater. She took my wallet and my identity card from her purse, set them beside me on the weathered wood, let me see the relief in my face, the tiny rise of hope, and then before my fingers reached them, she snatched both back. Better yet, I will keep these, she said softly, almost kindly, as if returning a borrowed scarf. Out here, what do you need them for? She walked to the bus we had ridden in on. The driver was still nursing a coffee, the paper cup leaving a ring on the hood. She said something to him. The engine rumbled, a tired animal that knew the route by memory. The bus left without me. I watched it shrink until it became a moving dot, until it became nothing. The platform fell quiet. A woman with 2 children counted coins and sighed. A vendor fanned his face with yesterday's paper. An old man sat across from me, dark glasses on, white cane angled at his shoes like a loyal dog. I tried to stand. 30 miles to my house, I told myself. 30 miles under a hot sun with no water, no money, no proof I was myself. The arithmetic of despair is very simple. It needs only distance and age. I sat back down and put my face in my hands. I had not cried in years. That day the tears came like something old breaking free. Rage, because humiliation is a violent thing that has nowhere to go. Helplessness, because the body remembers its limits even when pride forgets. Shame, because I had believed ordinary goodness would be enough, and because I had stayed so long that leaving me had become easy. There is a moment in some lives when the story you told yourself about who you are is stripped down to bone. In that silence, you can hear everything you refused to hear before. The way your wife's laughter stopped being private between you and started being private from you. The way birthdays turned into chores. The way you began to talk like a man apologizing for taking up space. I heard it all in that station, in the far clatter of a departing freight train, in the lazy buzz of a neon sign that promised cold drinks and delivered disappointment. "Excuse me, young man," a voice said. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The old man in the dark glasses had turned toward me. His posture had the careful dignity of someone who had practiced it long enough to survive. "Are you speaking to me?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I heard everything. I'm sorry for what happened to you." He did not sound sorry in the way people do when they only want to escape the awkwardness. He sounded like a man who knew the shape of a hole because he had fallen into one. There was a quiet authority in him, the kind that does not need to raise its voice because it has already been inside the worst rooms and come back out. "Thank you," I said. "I will be fine." "No," he said, and the word was not cruel, only true. "You will not be fine, not unless you listen very carefully for a few minutes." I looked at him properly then. His face was lined the way old maps are lined, with routes taken and rivers crossed and territories won and lost. The glasses hid his eyes entirely, but somehow I felt seen in a way that startled me, like stepping into shade after hours under the Sunday. "I do not want to trouble you," I said. "You are not a trouble," he answered. "You are a man at the end of a rope. I have known that feeling longer than I care to admit." A small wind moved across the platform. A napkin lifted, tried to fly, and died at my shoe. Somewhere, a bell rang without conviction. The world had that suspended feeling a town gets on a hot afternoon when everyone is waiting for something to break the spell. "Listen to me," he said, leaning a little closer. "I am going to ask you to pretend, only for a short while. Then you can decide what to do with the rest of your life." "Pretend?" I said. The word felt like stepping onto a loose plank. He nodded, and the motion was so slight I almost doubted I had seen it. "Pretend to be my son." I let out a small, helpless laugh. It sounded brittle in the open air. "Why would I do that?" "Because," he said, "my driver will arrive very soon, and your wife is about to regret leaving you next to the man people in this city whisper about when they talk about power." The platform tilted, or maybe it was just the story inside me shifting from one track to another. I thought of Lisa watching the bus windows blur by, thinking of me as a problem solved, a weight dropped. I thought of going home on foot like a ghost walking back to his own house. I thought of the old man's voice calm, precise, the kind of voice that had practiced command not to dominate but to steady. "I do not understand," I said. "You do not even know me." He smiled, small and strange, as if it's some private pun life had told him decades ago. "I know enough," he said. "I know how abandonment sounds, and I know when the world is giving me a chance to repair one small piece of it." Far down the road, I heard the hum of a powerful engine bending around the hills, growing from rumor to certainty. The old man tilted his head, as if listening to a promise he trusted. He lifted his cane, angled it toward me like a ceremonial sword, and in a voice quiet enough to be mistaken for kindness and strong enough to be mistaken for fate, he whispered, "Call me father when the car stops, and your old life will not dare to follow." The engine sound rolled closer. The sun pressed harder, and the first black shape of a luxury sport utility vehicle slid into view like a shadow arriving before the man who cast it. The black sport utility vehicle glided to a stop in front of the station, its surface reflecting the burning sky like a mirror made of wealth. Dust lifted from the ground, curling around the tires. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped breathing. The driver stepped out, a man in a dark suit, calm and efficient, the kind who spoke in sentences worth money. He moved to the back door, ready to open it. "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling," the driver said. "Apologies for the delay. The highway was busy. Do not worry, Stephen. You are right on time." The blind man's tone was casual, yet it carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Then he turned his head toward me and said, "Help me up, son." The word son struck something deep inside me, a place between disbelief and desperate hope. Every rational thought told me to walk away, but the emptiness in my chest was louder. For once in my life, I wanted to be needed, even if it was by a stranger who could not see my face. I took his hand. His grip was firm, not fragile, the hand of a man who had once built empires with it. As I helped him rise, he whispered softly, "Remember, speak little and keep your head high. You are my son now." We walked toward the vehicle. The driver, Stephen, raised an eyebrow for a fraction of a second, but quickly masked it with professionalism. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Henry," he said politely. "The pleasure is mine," I replied, my voice barely steady. When I opened the car door, I felt the cool breath of luxury wrap around me, air conditioning that smelled faintly of cedar and leather, the hum of quiet power. I had never been in a car like that. The seats seemed to cradle me, whispering that I did not belong but could pretend for a while. Just as I was about to get in, I heard my name. "Henry! Henry, wait!" It was Lisa. She was running toward us from the shop, a small paper bag of sweets swinging in her hand, confusion painted all over her face. The sight of the sport utility vehicle, the driver, and the blind man standing beside me froze her mid-step. "Henry, what is happening? Who is this man?" Mr. Sterling turned toward the voice, though he could not see her. His composure never cracked. "Excuse me, madam," he said with a politeness that could cut glass. "My son does not have time to chat with strangers." We have an important family dinner." Lisa blinked, speechless. "Your son?" She looked at me as though I'd become a stranger in an instant. "Henry, what is this man talking about? Why are you getting into his car?" For the first time in 35 years of marriage, I felt something new power. I met her gaze without trembling. "Lisa, I think you made it very clear earlier that you wanted nothing more to do with me," I said quietly. "So please, do not make this harder," she stammered, trying to piece her authority back together. "I was angry. I did not mean it. You know me, Henry." "No," I said, my voice firmer now. "You meant every word. And maybe you were right. Maybe I do deserve something better." Frank's hand tightened slightly on my arm, a silent gesture of approval. "Henry, son," he said, "your godmother is waiting for us for lunch. Let us go." Stephen opened the door. I stepped in. The door closed with a sound that felt final, like a chapter sealing shut. Through the tinted glass, I watched Lisa standing in the sun, her mouth open, the paper bag slipping from her hand. Candied fruits rolled across the dusty ground like tiny jewels of regret. As the vehicle moved away, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had finally left the weight of humiliation behind. Heavier because I had stepped into something unknown, something that might not let me go. Inside the car, silence settled for a moment. Then Frank spoke. "Are you all right, Henry?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't even understand what just happened." "What just happened," he replied, "is that you taught your wife a lesson she will never forget. She saw that the man she abandoned has more worth than she ever imagined." His tone was calm, but beneath it lived something fierce. Not revenge, but the satisfaction of justice well delivered. I turned to look at him. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know who I am." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling as though from a memory. "Because 30 years ago my only son died in an accident. He was your age then. And from that day my world went quiet. I have been searching for a reason to live ever since." His voice broke slightly on the last word, a small tremor that revealed more than any tears could. Outside the window, the countryside blurred into gold and green. The hum of the road sounded like destiny rearranging itself. I realized then that maybe pain was not the opposite of miracles, maybe it was their beginning. "Henry," he said softly, "you may think this is chance. It is not. God, fate, call it what you will, it led me to you. You needed saving, and perhaps I did too." We drove for almost 40 minutes, through long roads lined with oak trees. Their branches reached toward each other, forming a green cathedral above us. Then, ahead, I saw a white colonial mansion rising from the hills like something out of a forgotten dream. Frank turned his face toward the window as if he could still picture it. "Welcome to your new home, son," he said. My throat tightened. My new home. The words echoed in my chest like an unanswered prayer. When the vehicle passed through the iron gates that opened automatically before us, I had a strange realization that sometimes salvation does not arrive with angels or trumpets. Sometimes it arrives in a black sport utility vehicle driven by a man in a suit, and in the quiet voice of a blind stranger who tells you to pretend. I looked out at the sprawling gardens, the marble fountain, the white doves fluttering near the steps, and I could not tell whether I was entering heaven or walking straight into a test I did not yet understand. The air that met me when I stepped out of the car was unlike anything I had ever breathed. It smelled of trimmed hedges, rain-soaked stone, and the faint sweetness of lilies growing by the gate. Before me stood a mansion so vast it made me feel smaller than I had ever felt, yet somehow unbelievably chosen. Its white pillars rose like solemn guardians, its windows glinted with that polished pride only old money possesses. Frank leaned lightly on my arm as we approached the entrance. His cane clicked on the marble steps with measured rhythm, each tap a quiet statement. The blind man led, and I followed. "Stephen," Frank said calmly, "please tell Jane to prepare the East Wing guest room. Make sure they use the new Egyptian cotton sheets." "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Stephen answered, his tone filled with the practiced discipline of someone who had long known the weight of those words. I swallowed hard. The name Sterling rang somewhere deep in memory articles, maybe. Headlines about a man who owned half the food processing industry in the state, a billionaire whose fortune seemed untouchable. And now, here he was beside me, holding my arm as if we were family. When we entered, the world changed texture. Cool marble underfoot, gold-framed paintings on the walls, chandeliers raining soft light from above. The house smelled faintly of wax, lavender, and something else. Clean order, everything in its place, everything belonging to a story that had been told for generations. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side corridor, her uniform crisp, her posture straight. She froze for just a second when her eyes met mine. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Do you need anything?" "Yes, Jane," Frank replied, his tone carrying warmth wrapped in authority. "This is Henry. He's my son. He'll be staying with us from now on." I felt my stomach twist. The word son had never been so heavy, nor so strangely comforting. Jane blinked once, the perfect servant's blink that hides 1,000 questions, then nodded. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. I'll prepare everything right away." Frank gestured toward the living room. "Come, Henry." We entered a vast room with wide windows opening toward a garden that stretched into the horizon. Beige leather sofas, a stone fireplace, and a silence that hummed with dignity. The kind of silence you find in museums, where time holds its breath. "Sit," he said gently. I obeyed. He removed his dark glasses and placed them on the coffee table. His eyes were milky, lost in a fog of blindness, yet when they turned toward me, I felt as though he saw more than anyone else ever had. "I imagine you have questions," he said quietly. "Yes," I whispered. "All of them." He smiled faintly. "Then I will start from the only truth that matters." He leaned back, the weight of his years softening his voice. 30 years ago, my son Anthony died in a car accident. He was 30 years old, newly married, full of plans. My wife followed him 5 years later, not by illness but by grief. I was left with houses, companies, land, and silence. A silence so large, it filled every corridor. His words fell heavy between us. I had no answer. I could only listen. "I built this empire with my own hands," he continued. "But what good is an empire if there's no one to share breakfast with? If every room echoes your loneliness back at you?" He paused, then turned his head slightly toward me. "When I heard your wife at the station, when I heard what she said to you, I remembered what it felt like to lose everything you love in a single moment. But God is strange, Henry. Sometimes he gives us the chance to repair what we once lost, just not in the way we expect." He clasped his hands together. "So, I will make you an offer." I swallowed. "An offer?" "Yes. Stay here. Not as a guest, not as an employee. Stay as my son. Learn from me. Let me teach you the business I built. Let me give you a life where your dignity is never questioned again." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it echo through the marble floor. "Why me?" I asked. "Because when I found you, you had nothing, and yet you still said thank you," he replied. "Because humility is rarer than diamonds, Henry, and because I believe every man deserves one chance to rewrite his story." For a long moment, there was only silence. Outside, a bird sang a lonely tune before the dusk swallowed it. Finally, I found my voice. "I don't know if I deserve this." He turned his face fully toward me, his blind eyes glimmering with something like sorrow. "Do not say that again. You spent 35 years serving a woman who treated your kindness as weakness. Now it is time for you to see yourself the way I do as a man of worth." He extended his hand across the table, his fingers trembling slightly. "So, what do you say, Henry? Will you be my son?" For a moment, I saw my life flash in two versions. One where I walked 30 miles home that day to an empty apartment, and one where I stepped into this impossible new chapter. I took his hand. "Yes, Dad," I said, the word strange and warm in my mouth. His lips curved into the first genuine smile I had seen all day. "Thank you, son," he whispered. "You've just given my life meaning again." We sat there for a while, two men linked by loss and a shared need for belonging. The clock ticked softly, the evening deepened, and somewhere far in the house, Jane's voice carried faintly as she ordered dinner to be prepared. When the smell of roast chicken and fresh bread reached us, Frank stood, his movements careful but steady. "Come," he said, "let us eat as a family should." Dinner was served in a dining hall, so vast it could have held a wedding. Only 2 places were set, one at the head, one beside it. The silverware gleamed, the wine glowed ruby in crystal glasses. As we ate, Frank spoke lightly of plans. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will call my lawyer. I intend to make everything legal. You will be my heir, Henry. The companies, the houses, everything." I almost dropped my fork. "No, Dad. That's too much." He chuckled softly. "You'll understand soon. Money without family is just paper, and I am done living among strangers who call me sir but never mean it." I looked down at my plate, unable to speak. For the first time in decades, food tasted like something more than survival. It tasted like hope. But even as I tried to let that feeling settle, part of me wondered if fate was kind or if it was setting up the most unpredictable test of my life. Because somewhere out there, Lisa was still alive, still angry, and still watching. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows like a confession, The air in my new room was still filled with the faint scent of lilies from the garden below. The sheets under me were softer than anything I had ever owned, Egyptian cotton, Jane had said. For the first time in years, I had slept peacefully, without the sound of Lisa's complaints or the hum of warehouse machines echoing in my head. When I stepped onto the balcony, the world below looked like it belonged to someone else. Fountains glimmered, gardeners moved silently, and trimmed hedges curved into paths that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. It was too beautiful to be real, too calm to belong to a man like me. Downstairs, Frank was already waiting in the dining hall, sitting at the head of the table with the posture of a man born to command time itself. "Good morning, son," he said, smiling faintly. "Good morning, Dad," I answered. The word Dad came easier this time, softer, almost natural. Jane appeared with a silver tray, fresh bread, fruit, coffee poured into porcelain so thin the light passed through it. "Eat," Frank said calmly. "Today is an important day." He folded his hands and leaned forward. "We are visiting my lawyer, Mark Stevens. He will begin the paperwork to make you my heir. Before we go, I want you to understand what that means." I hesitated. "Dad, I don't think I understand any of this. I'm just—" "Not just anything," he interrupted gently. "You are not who you were yesterday. I do not need another businessman. I have plenty of those. What I need is someone who knows pain, effort, and gratitude. You, Henry, are that man." His tone was steady, his blind eyes fixed somewhere beyond me, as if looking through the layers of my fear. The world is full of people chasing wealth. What it lacks are men who remember what it feels like to struggle. His words hit deeper than I expected. I had never thought of struggle as a virtue before, but coming from him, it sounded sacred. After breakfast, Stephen drove us to the city. The glass tower of Sterling Enterprises reflected the sun like a blade, its logo visible even from the highway. Inside, my reflection followed me in every polished surface. The suit Jane had prepared for me fit perfectly. I looked like someone who might belong here almost. Mark Stevens greeted us with the professional grace of a man who had spent a lifetime surrounded by power. "Mr. Sterling," he said, shaking Frank's hand respectfully, "it's good to see you. And you must be Henry." "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to sound steady. "Mr. Sterling has told me all about you," he said. "We'll begin the adoption process and adjust the will. It's quite simple, though there are details we must handle carefully." He opened a folder and looked directly at me. "Are you currently married?" The question hit me like a cold gust of air. "Yes," I said slowly. "But my wife left me. We're separated." "Then the divorce must be finalized," he explained. "Legally, your spouse has rights to any inheritance unless there's a court order or prenuptial agreement." Frank's cane struck the floor once, sharp and decisive. "How long will that take?" "If uncontested, 3 to 6 months. If not, possibly years," Mark answered. Frank frowned. "Mark, I want this handled quickly. Hire whoever you must. That woman abandoned my son. She will not profit from her cruelty." "Understood, Mr. Sterling," Mark replied. When we left, the weight of what had just happened settled on me. 2 days ago, I was a man with nothing. Now lawyers spoke of me as if I were an heir. In the car, Frank's tone shifted from calm to serious. "Henry, listen carefully. From this moment, people will look at you differently. They'll come smiling, pretending to care. But it will not be love. It will be hunger." He turned slightly toward me. "Money doesn't change people, it reveals them. Remember that." I nodded, though my chest tightened with unease. The drive back was quiet. My phone buzzed again and again, unknown numbers, messages, calls. I ignored them until one name flashed across the screen. Lisa. My pulse spiked. I hesitated, staring at the name that used to mean home. "Answer if you must," Frank said without turning his head. "But choose your words wisely. You're not the man she left behind anymore." I took a breath and answered. "Henry, thank God," she cried. "I've been calling you for hours. Where are you?" Her voice trembled, rehearsed. "Why are you calling?" I asked flatly. "Because I made a mistake," she said quickly. "I was angry. I didn't mean those things I said." "You meant every word," I said. "You left me in the middle of nowhere and took everything I had. Please, come home. We can fix this," she pleaded. "There is no home, Lisa," I said quietly. "Not since the moment you got on that bus." For a moment, silence filled the line. Then came her sobs loud, deliberate. "Who is that man? Who is Frank Sterling? Why did you get into his car?" "That's not your concern," I said. "Not anymore. We were married 35 years, Henry. You can't throw that away because of one argument." "I'm not throwing anything away," I replied. You did that for both of us." I hung up. My hand shook, but I didn't feel weak. I felt lighter. Frank rested a hand on my shoulder. "That was the sound of a man taking his life back," he said. I looked out the window. Clouds were gathering, dark, dense, electric. A storm was forming over the hills. But something in my gut told me it wasn't just the weather. The real storm was about to begin. And this time, it would come for everything I had just found. By the time we returned to the mansion, the first drops of rain had already started to fall, tracing silver lines down the car windows like the world itself was weeping. The gates opened silently, the wheels rolled over wet gravel, and the grand house loomed ahead, white, proud, and heavy with secrets. As Stephen parked, Frank placed a hand on my arm. "Son," he said softly, "a storm has a purpose. It washes away what no longer belongs." I didn't know if he was talking about the weather or my past. Inside, Jane met us with towels and quiet efficiency. Everything about this house moved with a rhythm that made chaos feel far away. "Dinner will be served at 7 o'clock, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Good. And tell the chef to prepare something special," Frank replied. "We have much to celebrate." He turned his face toward me, and even without sight, I could feel his gaze cut straight through the fog of my thoughts. "You look like a man still unsure if he's allowed to be happy." He wasn't wrong. Every step I took in that mansion still felt borrowed, like I might wake up back at the train station. "I'm just trying to understand all this," I admitted. "Yesterday I was invisible. Today I'm sitting in your house, signing papers that will make me your heir. It feels like I've stepped into someone else's life." Frank smiled faintly. "No, Henry. You've stepped into your own, for the first time." After dinner, we sat in his study, a vast room lined with shelves of old books and the faint scent of tobacco and leather. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Frank leaned back in his chair, the flicker of a fireplace softening his features. "When I was young," he began, "I believed that success could fill the emptiness inside a man. I built factories, hotels, companies. I owned everything except peace. Then my son died, and I realized something cruel, that grief doesn't care how rich you are. It devours the rich and poor the same way." His voice faltered, just slightly. "Anthony was 30 when he died. The same age you were when you broke your back lifting crates at that warehouse, wasn't he?" I froze. "How do you know that?" "I asked Stephen to check," he said simply. "I wanted to know who you were before you became my son. A man's story matters more than his name." He stood slowly, walking toward the window, though he couldn't see it. "I've lived surrounded by people who bowed, smiled, and lied. I don't need more of those. What I need is truth, and you, Henry, are truth. I heard it in your voice at the station, when your wife humiliated you, and you still spoke with decency. That's rare." I lowered my head, unsure how to respond. His words hit like both blessing and burden. "I don't know if I can be what you expect me to be," I whispered. "You already are," he said. "You just don't see it yet." He turned back toward me, his hand resting on the edge of his desk. "I want you to stay here, not as a guest, not as an employee, as my son. Learn about the businesses, the properties, everything. Let me show you the world my son never had the chance to inherit. And when I am gone, it will all be yours." The sound of rain intensified outside, a steady rhythm against the glass. I looked around at the shelves filled with framed photographs, Frank in his younger days, shaking hands with governors and CEOs, his wife smiling beside him, and one picture of a young man who must have been Anthony. His face was kind, open, alive. I saw the resemblance in how Frank tilted his head when he smiled, in the quiet sadness beneath his calm. "Dad," I said softly, the word tasting both strange and right. "Why me? There must be hundreds of people who'd beg for your attention." "Because you never begged," he replied simply. "You never asked for a thing. You hesitated to even take my hand. That humility tells me more about you than any resume ever could." He stepped closer, searching for my hand until he found it. His palm was rough, warm, human. "When I'm gone, Henry, the world will try to tell you that my fortune is your reward. It isn't. Your reward is the life you're about to live, one built not on survival, but on meaning." I couldn't speak. My chest ached with a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and fear. He squeezed my hand gently. "Now go rest. Tomorrow begins your new life." I walked toward the grand staircase, each step echoing through the marble halls like a heartbeat. Halfway up, I paused and looked back. Frank was still standing there, framed by the glow of the fireplace, the image of a man who had seen too much loss to waste what time remained. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain tapped endlessly on the windows, and the words "your new life" replayed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't quiet. My phone vibrated on the bedside table. One new message. The screen lit up. It was from an unknown number. "Henry, it's me. Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." "Lisa." Again, I stared at her name, glowing in the dark. My thumb hovered over the screen, torn between anger and the ghost of what used to be love. Outside, thunder cracked louder than before, shaking the windows. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down and turned off the lamp. But as I closed my eyes, a cold thought crept in. Storms never arrive without reason. And sometimes, what they wash away isn't just the past, it's the illusion of peace before the next disaster. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and silent. The mansion's garden glistened under thin rays of sunlight, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. I came down to breakfast expecting calm, but Jane met me at the dining room door with an uneasy look. "Mr. Henry," she said quietly, "there's a woman waiting in the sitting room. She says she's your wife." My heart stopped for half a breath. I didn't need to ask who, Lisa. I entered the sitting room slowly. She was standing near the window, dressed carefully in a new beige dress, her hair brushed, makeup perfect. She turned when she heard me, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I'd once loved. Then she smiled, the same practiced smile she used on bank tellers and neighbors, and the illusion broke. "Henry," she said softly, "thank you for seeing me. I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," I answered. My voice came out flat, steady. She took a step closer. "I made a terrible mistake. I was angry. I was lost. I said things I didn't mean." Her voice quivered at the right moments. Her eyes glistened just enough. I had seen this performance too many times to mistake it for truth. "I still don't hear an apology," I said. "You're right," she whispered, lowering her gaze. "I'm sorry, Henry. I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me. Let's start over." I laughed once, quietly. "Start over? You left me at a train station like a stray dog, and now you walk into this house asking for forgiveness because you've realized what you lost." Her chin lifted slightly, and for a second I saw the steel beneath the tears. "You think I care about this house? About this man?" she asked, glancing toward the door as if Frank himself might appear. "I care about us. 35 years, Henry. You can't erase that in a week." "35 years of what?" I said, my tone sharp. "Of being reminded every day that I wasn't enough? Of listening to you compare me to every man richer than me? You didn't love me, Lisa. You loved what I could give until I ran out." She moved closer. "We can have everything now," she said quickly. "This house, this life. We can finally live the way we always dreamed." And there it was, the truth wrapped in desperation. "You're not here for love," I said coldly. "You're here for money." Her face hardened, the tears vanishing. "You're really going to throw away your wife for some blind old man's fortune? Don't talk about him like that," I said, stepping forward. "Frank has more honor in his blindness than you've ever had with both eyes open." She flinched, and for the first time, she looked small. "Henry, please," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "Don't do this. I can change." I pulled my hand away. "Get out, Lisa." She froze. "What?" "You heard me. Leave this house and don't come back. My lawyer will contact you. The divorce will be quick if you sign the papers quietly." "You can't be serious," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "After everything I've done for you, you think you can just—" "No, Lisa," I interrupted. "You did it first. You threw me away when you thought I was nothing. You taught me how easy it was to stop caring." Her eyes filled with anger now, not tears. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you can play rich. You're still the same pathetic man you always were." "Maybe," I said calmly. "But at least now I know what kind of woman I married." She stood trembling, lips pressed tight, then turned and stormed out of the room, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. The echo of the door slamming felt like thunder after lightning, violent but inevitable. Frank appeared moments later, guided by the soft tap of his cane. "Is she gone?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "Good," he replied. "Sometimes we have to let people walk out of our lives, even if it means leaving the door open for the wind." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son. You stood up for yourself with dignity." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. "It doesn't feel like victory, Dad." "That's because it isn't," he said softly. "It's liberation, and freedom always feels strange to those who've lived too long in cages." For the next few days, the house was peaceful. I threw myself into learning, studying Sterling Enterprises, sitting in on meetings, listening as Frank explained the principles behind his empire. He taught me that business was not just about profit. It was about loyalty, intuition, and power used with restraint. Every night, over dinner, he shared stories how he built the first factory with a single loan, how he refused to bribe officials even when it cost him millions, how integrity was the only currency that never lost its value. For the first time, I began to believe that I could become more than the man Lisa had convinced me I was. But as the days passed, the quiet in the house grew too perfect, the kind of quiet that warns before a storm. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in Frank's study, Stephen entered carrying a phone. "Mr. Henry," he said carefully, "there's someone on the line asking for you. She refused to give her name, but she insists it's urgent." I took the phone, already knowing who it was. "Henry," Lisa's voice came through, tight and bitter. "You think this is over? It's not. You'll see me again in court." I felt my heart sink. "What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough," she said, her tone dripping with spite. "Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, the silence ringing louder than her voice had. Frank, who had been sitting nearby, tilted his head. "That was her, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said. "She's planning something." He nodded once, expression unreadable. "Let her try," he said quietly. "But be prepared, Henry. When greed fails, revenge always takes its place." That night, as I stood by my window watching the lights shimmer over the wet garden, I felt something deep inside shift, not fear, not anger, but a strange sense of readiness. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running anymore. I was waiting, and whatever storm Lisa was bringing next, I was no longer the man she could destroy. The following week unfolded with deceptive calm. Mornings began with sunlight over the terraces, and the smell of coffee drifting through the halls. Afternoons passed in the quiet rhythm of paperwork and meetings with Frank's business partners. On the surface, everything seemed steady, too steady, as if life was holding its breath. But I could feel the pressure building, like thunder rolling somewhere beyond the horizon. Frank had warned me. When people smelled fortune, they came crawling out of their graves. It started on a Thursday afternoon. Stephen entered the office, his usual composure slightly cracked. "Mr. Henry," he said, "there's someone at the gate asking to see you. She says she's your sister." My chest tightened. "Claire?" "Yes, sir. She said it's urgent." For a few seconds, I didn't move. The name alone carried a lifetime of tension. Claire and I hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since she married Greg, a real estate developer who liked to remind everyone how smart he was with money. She had always looked down on me, the warehouse worker, the man with calloused hands and a second-hand car. To her, I had been a constant reminder of everything she'd escaped. "Let her in," I said finally. When she walked into the sitting room, she looked every inch the woman she had always wanted to be. Designer coat, expensive perfume, and that same faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Henry!" she said brightly, opening her arms as if we'd just missed each other at a family reunion. "Claire," I said, keeping my voice polite but distant. "It's been a long time." "Too long," she replied, settling gracefully into a chair without being invited. Her eyes moved around the room, cataloging every detail, the carved furniture, the chandelier, the gold-framed portraits. "This place is beautiful," she said. "Unbelievable, really. So, this is where you live now?" "For now," I said. She gave a short laugh. "For now," he says. "You've changed, Henry. People change when life gives them a reason to," I said. She crossed her legs, tilting her head. "I heard about everything. What happened with Lisa, and this man, Mr. Sterling. I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." Her tone was soft, but I knew that voice too well. It was the same tone she used when she wanted something. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm glad to hear it." She paused, pretending to choose her next words carefully. "You know, Greg's business has been struggling a little lately. Real estate isn't what it used to be. We're thinking of expanding into new ventures, maybe even partnering with someone experienced." There it was. "Partnering?" I repeated. "You mean with me?" "Well, maybe with Mr. Sterling," she said quickly, forcing a light laugh. "Your family now. You could introduce us. Greg's a genius at property development. I think they'd get along." I stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "It's funny, Claire. When I lost my job 5 years ago and asked to borrow $2,000 for Lisa's surgery, you said you couldn't afford it. But now you're offering partnership deals worth millions." Her smile faltered. "Henry, that's not fair. Things were different then." "Were they?" I asked quietly. "You were driving a new Mercedes that same month." She shifted in her seat, her practiced confidence slipping for just a second. "I just want us to be close again," she said finally. "We're all we have left, you and me." Frank's cane tapped gently against the floor as he entered the room. His presence filled the space without effort. calm but commanding. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice steady. "And you must be Claire." Claire stood quickly, her smile returning. "Mr. Sterling, it's such an honor. I've heard so much about you. I'm sure you have," Frank said, tilting his head slightly, listening to her voice with that uncanny perception of his. "You came to see your brother, I hear." "Yes. I was just visiting," she said smoothly. "We were catching up after a long time apart. Family is important," Frank said evenly. "But so is honesty." Claire blinked, unsure how to respond. Frank gestured toward the door. "Stephen, would you be so kind as to bring us tea?" As Stephen left, Frank moved toward a chair and sat down, facing Claire, though his eyes never met hers. "Tell me, Claire," he said, "what brings you here today, really?" Claire's charm began to falter under his calm scrutiny. "I just wanted to make sure Henry's all right," she stammered. "I see," Frank said, "because you heard he was living with me. Because you heard the man, who was once a warehouse worker, is now heir to a fortune. That sort of concern has a particular sound to it." Her cheeks reddened slightly. "Mr. Sterling, I think you misunderstand." "No," he interrupted softly. "I understand perfectly." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Claire smiled weakly, trying to regain her balance. "Henry, you've found quite the mentor," she said finally. "You're lucky." "I know," I said simply. She stood abruptly, clearly eager to escape the tension. "Well, I should go. But Henry, maybe we can all have dinner soon? You, me, Greg, Mr. Sterling?" Frank leaned back slightly, the faintest trace of a smile at his lips. "Perhaps," he said, "if fortune favors sincerity." Claire's smile froze, unsure whether she had been insulted or complimented. "Of course," she murmured. "Goodbye, Henry." After she left, the silence lingered like perfume. "She'll be back," Frank said finally. "When greed fails the first time, it comes back disguised as guilt." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "She's my sister, Dad." He nodded slowly. "And blood son is the oldest illusion of loyalty. You'll learn that soon enough." That night, I stood by my bedroom window, watching rain clouds gather again in the distance. My phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. I opened it. "Henry, it's Claire. Please don't take what happened today the wrong way. I just want to help. I care about you." I stared at the words, feeling nothing but exhaustion. For most of my life, I had longed for my family to care. Now that they did, I finally understood it wasn't love that brought them back. It was the scent of opportunity. I turned off the phone and let the room fall dark. But deep inside, I knew Frank was right. The storm that had started with Lisa wasn't over. It had only changed faces. The storm finally arrived, not from the sky this time, but from paper, signatures, and lies wrapped in legal language. It began one Tuesday morning when Mark Stevens, Frank's lawyer, called with an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Henry," he said, his voice tight, "you need to come to the office immediately. There's been a filing against you." When we arrived, the air in his office felt heavier than usual. Mark slid a stack of documents across the desk. "Your wife," he said grimly, "has filed a lawsuit. She's accusing you of financial manipulation, coercion, and elder abuse." I froze. "Elder abuse? What are you talking about? She claims you've taken advantage of Mr. Sterling's condition, that you manipulated him into naming you his heir." For a moment, the world went silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Frank sat perfectly still beside me, his face calm, his blind eyes unfocused but his mind razor sharp. "She's working with someone," he said quietly. "Lisa doesn't have the intelligence to orchestrate this alone." Mark nodded. "She's being represented by your sister's husband, Greg. His firm filed the paperwork yesterday." The blood drained from my face. "Claire." Frank sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I told you, son. Greed never travels alone. It always brings company." I buried my head in my hands. "What do we do now?" Mark looked at me firmly. "We fight back. But you must understand, this won't stay private. Once the story reaches the press, it'll spread fast. They'll twist every detail." And they did. Within 48 hours, headlines erupted across local news. "Warehouse worker manipulates blind billionaire into adoption scheme." My name, the same name that once meant nothing, was now everywhere. Photos of me and Frank outside the lawyer's office, taken without permission, flooded the internet. Every news anchor had an opinion. Some called me a fraud. Others called me a con artist. "Do not answer them," Frank instructed. "Do not feed wolves what they crave most attention." But the damage was already spreading. Strangers shouted outside the mansion gates. Drones hovered over the gardens. And one afternoon, a reporter shouted from the road, "Henry, how much did you steal from the old man before he went blind?" I clenched my fists, but Frank's hand on my arm stopped me. "Let them bark," he said. "The truth doesn't shout, it waits." That night, Mark came to the house with an update. "They've filed a motion to freeze your access to Mr. Sterling's assets until the case is resolved," he said. "The judge has granted a temporary hold." "So they're taking everything?" I asked bitterly. "Not permanently," Mark said, "but they're trying to make you look guilty before you can defend yourself." Frank's expression didn't change. "Good," he said. "Good," I repeated, stunned. He smiled faintly. "Let them build their lies as high as they can. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall." It was the first time I saw not just calm in Frank, but strategy. Behind that stillness was the mind of a man who had fought wars in boardrooms and won every single one. The next week was a blur of depositions, statements, and whispers. Claire testified first, her voice trembling in false sadness. "I'm worried about my brother," she said to the camera crews. "He's not the same. Ever since that man took him in, he's changed. He's different." Lisa, of course, followed. She cried in court, describing how I abandoned her for wealth, how I brainwashed an old man to gain power. Her performance was perfect. She even wore black, like a widow mourning a man who hadn't died. And me? I sat there in silence, watching the woman I'd once loved destroy the last remnants of my old life with words sharpened by greed. When the hearing ended, the reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, questions flying like arrows. Frank stood beside me, his hand steady on his cane, unbothered. "Do not look at them," he murmured. "Look ahead." Inside the car, I finally broke the silence. "Dad, what if we lose?" He turned his head toward me, blind eyes somehow burning with certainty. "We won't. Because truth isn't something you win, it's something that survives." Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Henry, it's time you learned something about me. Before I lost my sight, I learned to see in other ways. I don't trust words, I trust evidence. And I've kept more of it than anyone realizes." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled, slow and knowing. "When you've lived surrounded by liars for 50 years, you make a habit of recording the truth. Every conversation, every deal, every visitor who enters my home, all of it." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're saying you have proof?" He nodded. "Of everything." Mark, sitting in the front seat, turned around, stunned. "Mr. Sterling, you mean you—" "Yes," Frank said. "Hidden cameras, audio logs, call records. I installed them long before Henry arrived. It's how I survived this long without being robbed blind, literally." A rush of relief and shock flooded through me at once. "So, Lisa and Claire," Frank's smile deepened, "will hang themselves with their own words." The next day, Frank handed Mark a sealed black case. Inside were encrypted drives, labeled by date and location. "Deliver these to the court," he said. "They'll tell the truth louder than any lawyer can." And as the rain began to fall again that night, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a fight for my name. It was a war between truth and deception. Between the man I used to be and the man Frank Sterling had taught me to become. The hearing was set for Friday. The world would soon find out who was lying and who had built their life on lies. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, their umbrellas forming a sea of black under the drizzle. Cameras pointed at the entrance like rifles, ready to fire questions instead of bullets. Stephen opened the car door for us, and as Frank and I stepped out, the noise erupted: flashes, voices, chaos. "Henry, did you manipulate Mr. Sterling? Mr. Sterling, do you realize your heir has a criminal past? Are you being forced to defend him?" Frank's grip on my arm tightened slightly. "Smile, son," he whispered. "They feed on fear." We walked past the cameras without saying a word. Inside the courthouse, everything smelled of paper, damp wool, and nerves. Mark was waiting near the courtroom door, holding a briefcase and looking confident but serious. "Are we ready?" he asked quietly. Frank nodded. "Always." The hearing began at 10 o'clock sharp. Judge Morrison presided, a man in his 60s with a reputation for cutting through lies like a blade. On one side sat Lisa, dressed in a modest beige dress, her hair neatly pinned, her lawyer cousin whispering in her ear. Next to her, Claire fidgeted with her hands, avoiding my gaze. Mark rose first. "Your Honor, we have submitted video and audio recordings that directly refute all accusations against my client, Henry Sterling." Lisa's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These recordings were made without consent," and Judge Morrison raised a hand. "Were they recorded on private property?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mark replied calmly. At Mr. Sterling's residence, which clearly displays posted notices that all premises are under video surveillance. The judge nodded. Then it's legal. Proceed. Mark opened his laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. The first video began to play. There was Lisa, standing in the Sterling sitting room, the day she came, begging for forgiveness. Her face on the screen was different. No filters, no courtroom performance. Her voice was sharp, desperate. We can live well now, Henry. We can travel. We can have everything we always dreamed of. Then came my voice, calm and steady. You're not here for love. You're here for money. The courtroom fell silent. Every word echoed off the walls. Next came Claire's visit. The recording showed her smile fading when I refused her request for help. Then the line that sealed her fate. You're going to regret this, Henry. Lisa asked me to testify in her favor, and I think I'm going to do it. The judge's eyes narrowed. Miss Claire, did you or did you not say those words? Claire's lips trembled. I was upset. Answer the question. Yes, she whispered. Mark stopped the video. Your Honor, this is direct evidence of collusion between the plaintiff and a key witness, with the intent to fabricate accusations against my client. Lisa's face turned white. Her lawyer scrambled for a response, but the damage was irreversible. Judge Morrison leaned back, removing his glasses. Mrs. Lisa, these recordings clearly contradict your sworn statements. Would you like to explain? Lisa hesitated, her voice breaking. Your Honor, I was manipulated. I thought You thought what? The judge interrupted coldly. That your husband, whom you abandoned, somehow forced you to lie under oath? Tears streamed down her cheeks, but no one looked convinced anymore. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, turning toward Frank. I've reviewed your medical records. You are indeed blind, but mentally sound. Is it true that you initiated the adoption yourself? Yes, Your Honor, Frank replied, his voice firm and clear. Henry never asked for a thing. He didn't even believe me at first. I found him abandoned, broken, and I chose to make him family. If that is manipulation, then the world has lost its sense of honor. You could feel the silence afterward, the kind that sinks into your bones. The judge looked from Frank to me, then to Lisa and Claire. This court sees no evidence of fraud, coercion, or manipulation. What I do see are two individuals, the plaintiff and her witness, who have lied repeatedly for personal gain. Therefore, I am dismissing all claims against Mr. Henry Sterling with prejudice. He paused, letting the words settle like thunder. Furthermore, the court will be referring both Mrs. Lisa and Miss Claire to the district attorney's office for investigation into possible perjury and defamation. Lisa gasped. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Court adjourned, the judge said, striking the gavel. The sound echoed through the courtroom like the closing of a door that would never open again. Outside, the reporters swarmed once more. But this time, the questions were different. Henry, how does it feel to be vindicated? Mr. Sterling, were you aware your family plotted against you? Do you plan to press further charges? Frank smiled faintly at the chaos, then turned his face toward the sky. Truth doesn't need to scream, he said softly to me. It just needs to stand long enough to be seen. In the car, I stared out the window, watching the courthouse shrink into the distance. My phone buzzed an unknown number. I answered. It was Greg, Claire's husband. His voice was trembling. Henry, please. Claire's terrified. The kids are crying. She knows she's ruined everything. I'm begging you drop the charges. She'll retract everything. She'll apologize publicly. Just please don't let her go to jail. For a long time, I said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence. Then I finally answered, my voice low. Tell her I'll think about it. When I hung up, Frank's hand rested on my shoulder. This is where character is tested, son, he said. Not when you're defeated, but when you've already won. I nodded slowly, staring at the blurred world outside, because I knew he was right. I had won. But what kind of man would I become now that victory was mine? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the quiet of my vast new room, the shadows of the chandelier stretching like veins across the ceiling. Victory should have felt like peace, but instead, it felt like weight. The echo of Greg's voice replayed in my mind. Please, Henry, don't let her go to jail. Think about the children. His words hit harder than any insult ever could. Frank had gone to bed early, but I knew he wasn't sleeping either. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard the faint sound of music from downstairs, his old record player spinning a Bach concerto, soft and haunting. I followed the melody to his study, where he sat with a cup of tea in his hands. the faint glow of a lamp outlining his silhouette. He didn't turn when I entered. "You couldn't sleep either, could you?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, sitting across from him. "I keep thinking about Claire, about her kids." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that. "You're wondering if mercy is weakness." "Maybe," I admitted. "She lied, she betrayed me. But those kids, they didn't ask for any of this." Frank leaned back, folding his hands over his cane. "When I disinherited my siblings after they tried to steal from me, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt emptiness. Because justice isn't about revenge, Henry, it's about balance. The law will punish them if you allow it, but forgiveness teaches you who you really are." I looked down at my hands that had once carried boxes, not legacies. "So what would you do if you were me?" He smiled faintly. "I'd ask myself one question. What kind of man do you want to become when people remember your name?" The silence after that question was heavier than any argument. I went back to my room before dawn, the house quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the hall. And as the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I made my choice. At 9 o'clock, I called Mark. "Drop the charges against Claire," I said simply. "But with conditions." "What conditions?" Mark asked cautiously. "She retracts her statements publicly. She apologizes on the same platforms where she defamed me. And she signs a legal document promising never to contact me again. No calls, no visits, nothing." Mark paused for a moment, then said, "Understood. And Lisa?" "With her," I said coldly, "we proceed. No deals, no mercy. She knew exactly what she was doing." By evening, the decision had already reached Greg's family. The next day, Claire appeared on a local radio program. Her voice was trembling, stripped of arrogance, naked with guilt. "I lied about my brother Henry," she said. "I said terrible things that weren't true. I let greed and jealousy blind me. Henry is a good man. He didn't deserve what I did to him. I'm sorry." I listened from the kitchen while Jane brewed coffee. When Claire's voice cracked at the end, Jane turned to me and asked softly, "Do you feel better now, Mr. Henry?" I took a long breath before answering. Not better, but at peace. And for the first time in months, it was true. The weeks that followed moved gently, almost tenderly. The lawsuit was closed. Lisa's charges were dismissed with prejudice, and she faced her own reckoning perjury, attempted fraud, 2 years probation, and a $20,000 fine. Word spread that she'd moved in with a cousin in a small apartment, working as a cashier at a grocery store. The woman who once mocked me for being poor was now counting pennies for others. Claire kept her promise. She never called again. Greg sent one last message thanking me for sparing her, but I didn't reply. Some wounds weren't meant to be reopened. By summer, my life had settled into rhythm. Every morning, Frank and I had breakfast in the sunroom, the light streaming through the tall windows, warming the marble floors. Every afternoon, we worked side by side in his office, him explaining, me absorbing. He taught me about negotiations, about reading people, about the quiet power of patience. "Most men speak to be heard," he said once. "But the real power lies with the man who knows when to listen." In time, I learned not just his business, I learned his values. "Wealth without integrity," he said, "is poverty with a better wardrobe." 3 months later, the adoption became official. The judge handed me a certificate that read, "Henry Sterling, legal son of Frank Sterling." I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. Frank smiled gently. "Now you are officially my son," he said. "But truthfully, you were that from the day we met." That evening, the staff prepared a small celebration. Jane baked a cake, Stephen brought champagne, and Frank, stubborn as ever, insisted on giving a toast. "To my son," he said, raising his glass, "not by blood, but by choice. Because sometimes, family isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you earn." I couldn't speak. I just lifted my glass and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." But beneath the laughter and the music, I felt something deeper. Not joy, not relief. Something that felt closer to destiny, the sense that everything had happened exactly as it was meant to. Still, a question lingered in my mind. That day at the train station, the coincidence, the timing, the blind man who seemed to know my name before I spoke it. Was it fate or something more? One evening, months later, as the sun set over the garden, I finally asked him, "Dad," I said softly, "that day at the station, why were you there?" "You said it was fate, but I can't stop wondering," Frank chuckled, tapping his cane lightly on the floor. "You always were too curious for your own good." He paused, then turned his face toward me with that small, knowing smile. "All right, son, I'll tell you. But what I'm about to say may change how you see everything. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. Frank's smile faded into something gentler, almost sad. I wasn't at that station by accident, Henry. Someone told me to go. Someone? I whispered. Who? He took a deep breath. Jane. My heart skipped a beat. Jane? Our housekeeper? Yes, she's more than that. She's family distantly, through my late wife. She called me that morning and told me there was a man sitting alone at the station, broken, abandoned, and something in her voice told me I had to see for myself. I stared at him, the realization crashing through me like a wave. So you knew, he nodded slowly. Not who you were, but that you were someone I was meant to find. The world seemed to still in that moment. Sometimes, he said quietly, the people we're destined to meet are not placed in our path by chance. They're placed there by purpose. I looked at him, at the man who had given me a second life, and felt tears rise unbidden. You saved me, I whispered. No, Frank said, smiling faintly. You saved me. And as the light of evening faded through the glass, I realized something I would carry forever. That the worst day of my life, the day I was left alone at that train station, was not a curse. It was the beginning of everything. But destiny, as I would soon discover, wasn't finished with me yet. Months passed, and life settled into a calm rhythm that almost felt unreal. Every morning I woke up to the sound of birds outside the window, sunlight painting the marble floors gold. The bitterness of the past had faded, replaced by quiet purpose. I was no longer the man who once begged for dignity at a train station. I was Henry Sterling' adopted son, student of legacy, and in many ways the man Frank had always hoped his own son would become. Yet beneath that calm surface, there was something stirring, not fear, but curiosity. I had rebuilt my life on gratitude, but a part of me still needed to understand why everything had unfolded the way it did. Why did Jane tell Frank about me that day? Why did she believe I was worth saving? And most of all, what had Frank seen in me that morning when he asked me to pretend I was his son? The answer came quietly. One autumn afternoon, Frank and I were sitting in his garden, the leaves glowing amber in the late light. He was wearing his favorite gray coat and holding a cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly with age, but his voice as steady as ever. You've changed, he said. Your voice, your posture, even your silence. You carry yourself like a man who knows who he is. I smiled faintly. That's because I finally do. He chuckled softly. Good. That means I can rest soon. I frowned. Don't say that, Dad. He lifted a hand. It's not sadness, son. It's peace. When you've spent a lifetime fighting to fill an emptiness inside you, and one day you wake up and it's gone, that's peace. He paused, tilting his head toward the horizon, as if he could still see the sun setting there. But before I go, there's one last thing I need to do, and one last thing you need to learn. The following week, Frank arranged a board meeting with his executives. It was the first one he'd attended in person in years. The conference room was a cathedral of glass and steel, overlooking the city he had built piece by piece. As we entered, every head turned toward him, some with respect, others with calculation. Frank, even blind, commanded the room like a man who could see every intention in it. He rested his cane beside the table and said, Gentlemen, from today forward, my son Henry will assume full operational control of Sterling Enterprises. A murmur ran through the room's surprise, disbelief, envy. I could see it in their eyes. To them, I was still the warehouse worker, the outsider who had stumbled into power by luck. But Frank raised his hand, silencing the noise. I built this company on trust, he said. Not on pedigree, not on money, but on loyalty. And this man beside me has earned mine. He turned his head slightly toward me. Son, tell them what I told you about legacy. I stood, my palms damp but my voice steady. Legacy, I said, isn't what you leave behind in buildings or accounts. It's what remains when your name no longer needs defending. It's how people speak of you when you're not in the room. And it's built, one decision at a time, on how you treat those who can do nothing for you. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Frank smiled, a slow, proud smile that said more than any applause could. That, he said, is my heir. The transition wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges, contracts, negotiations, whispers of doubt. But under Frank's guidance, I learned to navigate it all. When he finally retired officially, 6 months later, the ceremony was quiet, attended only by a few close partners and the staff who had served him for decades. He refused any grand farewell. A man should leave like a shadow, he said, not a storm. That evening, as the guests departed, I found him sitting in his favorite chair in the garden, the last light of day reflecting off the pond. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Giving it all away?" He smiled faintly. "I didn't give it away, Henry. I passed it forward. There's a difference." 2 years after that day at the train station, I returned there once more. Stephen drove me quietly, saying nothing as the landscape of my old life unfolded through the window, the same cracked roads, the same faded signposts, the same station bench still standing beneath the rusted awning. I asked him to wait in the car and walk to that bench alone. The air smelled of dust and rain, and for a moment, it felt like stepping into a memory that had been waiting for me to come back. I sat down in the same spot where I had once cried, where everything had ended and begun at once. Across the platform, a young couple was arguing, the woman shouting, the man silent, his shoulders slumped in quiet defeat. I recognized that expression, the helplessness of a man who has given everything and still been told he is not enough. When she stormed off toward the parking lot, he sat down on the bench opposite mine, burying his face in his hands. Without thinking, I stood, walked over, and sat beside him. "Rough day?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. "My wife left me," he muttered, "said I'd never be worth anything." I reached into my pocket and handed him one of my business cards. Simple, white, with only a name. Henry Sterling, CEO, Sterling Enterprises. "Call me," I said quietly. "If you ever need help, a job, a start, or just someone to talk to." He looked at the card, then at me, confused. "Why are you doing this?" I smiled faintly. "Because once someone did the same for me." As I walked back to the car, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Stephen opened the door, and as I got in, I glanced one last time at the platform. The man was still staring at the card, as if it were a lifeline. "You did a good thing today," Stephen said softly. I nodded. "No," I replied. "Frank did. I'm just continuing what he started." Back at the mansion, Frank was waiting in his chair near the window, his face calm, his hands folded over his cane. I told him what happened, and he smiled faintly. "That's how legacy works, son," he said. "It's not about being remembered, it's about keeping something alive even when you're gone." The following spring, Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was simple, just as he wanted: no speeches, no grand gestures, only a few of us standing under a clear morning sky. As I stood by his grave, I felt neither loss nor sorrow, only gratitude, because for the first time, I understood what he had given me wasn't just a name or a fortune, but a way to live. That evening, back at the house, I walked into his study. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne and old books. On his desk was a single envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a note that read, "You were never a replacement for what I lost, Henry. You were the proof that I had never lost the capacity to love. Carry that forward and the world will never forget you." I sat there for a long time, the sunset spilling red light across the desk. In that moment, I realized something profound, that the story I had lived wasn't one of tragedy, betrayal, or luck. It was a story about second chances, about how even in the wreckage of humiliation and heartbreak, life could rebuild itself if you just dared to believe again. Sometimes, the people who save you appear in the most impossible places: a train station, a stranger's kindness, a blind man's wisdom. And sometimes, the person you become after losing everything is the person you were always meant to be. That day at the station, I thought my life had ended. In truth, it had only just begun. 2 years later, I stood before the headquarters of Sterling Enterprises, a skyscraper of glass and light that reflected the morning sun like a mirror to the sky. The lobby was filled with people who now worked under my direction. Yet even after all this time, I never let the title CEO rest too comfortably on my shoulders. Frank's words echoed in my memory every time I walked through those doors. "Power is a mirror, Henry. It doesn't show you who others are, it shows you who you've become." Running his empire had been both a privilege and a test. I expanded our operations into renewable energy and social housing projects, not for profit, but because Frank had once told me that a business that doesn't serve humanity will eventually be consumed by it. Every decision I made carried his silent guidance. His portrait now hung in the boardroom, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, but somehow still watching over everything. People often said his death marked the end of an era. But to me, it was the beginning of one, a quieter, wiser age built on everything he taught me: discipline, compassion, and the unspoken power of doing the right thing when no one is watching. Life moved on, but I often found myself returning to small rituals that kept him near. Every Sunday, I would visit his grave with a single white rose, the same kind he used to keep in a crystal vase by his bedside. Jane would join me sometimes, leaving flowers of her own, and always smiling softly when she spoke his name. One morning, as we stood there in silence, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Mr. Henry, when I first told him about you, I didn't know I was changing both your lives." But he always said one thing afterward. "That man will be my redemption." I turned to her, the wind tugging gently at my coat. "And was I?" I asked. She smiled through glistening eyes. More than he ever dared hope. That afternoon, I returned to the office and opened the drawer where I kept Frank's last letter. I read it again, tracing the words with my fingers like a prayer. "You are proof that kindness is never wasted. The world will try to tell you that mercy is weakness, that love makes men soft. Don't believe it. The hardest thing in life is to stay gentle in a world that rewards cruelty. That will be your real inheritance." Those words had become my compass. 6 months later, an invitation arrived, a ceremony to honor Sterling Enterprises for its contributions to social development. It was to be held in the same city where Frank had founded his first factory 50 years ago. When I took the stage that night, the lights were blinding and the applause thunderous. But I didn't speak immediately. I let the noise fade, the silence settle, and then I said, "I'm standing here today because a blind man saw something in me when I couldn't see anything in myself. He taught me that wealth is not about what you own, but about who you lift up. Every success this company achieves belongs to him and to everyone who believes that second chances are worth giving." The audience rose to its feet, but it wasn't the applause that moved me, it was the realization that this was the full circle Frank had wanted me to complete. The boy who once sat crying on a train station bench had become the man he was meant to be. Later that night, I drove alone to that same station one last time. It hadn't changed much, the same cracked tiles, the same faint smell of rust and rain. I sat on that familiar bench, running my hand along the worn wood, and smiled. Somewhere deep down, I could still hear his voice, calm, certain, immortal. "Pretend you're my son, Henry. The driver will be here in 5 minutes." That was the moment everything turned. The air was cold, but my heart was warm. I realized that life isn't measured by what it takes from you, but by what it leaves behind. Pain, loss, betrayal, they're not the end. They're the doorway to understanding what truly matters. Frank had given me everything, his home, his trust, his name. But what I carried forward was not his fortune, it was his faith in me. As I rose from the bench and looked at the empty tracks stretching into the night, I whispered to the wind, "Thank you, Dad. I kept my promise." A gust of air swept through the station then, scattering a few dry leaves across the platform. For a fleeting moment, I could almost swear I heard his voice again, faint, distant, but clear. "You did well, son." I smiled, turned toward the waiting car, and walked away. The past no longer chained me. It guided me. And for the first time, I understood what Frank truly meant when he said that some stories don't end, they just change the name of the storyteller. Because that day at the train station, when a blind man reached out his hand and asked me to pretend, I didn't just find a father, I found myself.